She called her millionaire boss honey by mistake, but what he said next melted her heart. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The morning sun had barely touched the glass towers of Manhattan when Clara James hurried through the revolving doors of Beaumont and Fields. She was late again. Her sneakers squeaked against the polished marble floors as she clutched 2 paper cups of coffee and a folder full of reports she had stayed up all night to finish. Around her, the office buzzed with the kind of perfection she could never seem to match: tailored suits, fresh perfume, the sharp rhythm of heels on tile. "Elevator closing," she gasped, sliding in just in time. Her reflection in the mirror walls set it all dark circles, messy bun, and a blouse with a tiny coffee stain near the collar. She sighed. "One more day of pretending I belong here," she told herself. Clara worked as a temporary assistant in the marketing division, a short-term contract that barely covered rent for her tiny Brooklyn apartment. But she had dreams much bigger than filing reports. She wanted to pitch an idea she had called Human First, a project about putting empathy at the center of corporate culture. If only someone important would listen. The elevator doors opened on the 32nd floor, revealing a world of glass, light, and cold silence. Beaumont and Fields' top executives worked here, including the new CEO, Alexander Beaumont. Clara had never spoken to him directly, but everyone described him the same way: brilliant, intimidating, and absolutely humorless. Trying to calm her nerves, she placed the coffee cups on the counter and reached for her phone to call her teammate Hannah to help set up the meeting room. But in her rush, she clicked the wrong extension. The line clicked open. "Honey, could you bring me a clean towel, please? I just spilled coffee all over." A deep male voice interrupted. "Excuse me?" Clara froze. The air left her lungs. She looked up, and there he was, Alexander Beaumont himself, standing right in front of her, holding his phone to his ear. His expression was unreadable, sharp eyes narrowing behind rimless glasses. The room went quiet. "Oh no," she whispered. "Oh no." Alexander lowered his phone slowly. "So," he said, his voice smooth but edged with amusement, "I am Honey now." Her face turned crimson. "Sir, I thought you were, it was a mistake. I am so sorry." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "It certainly was," he replied, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "But it is not the worst thing I have been called before." The corner of his mouth twitched again, almost like a smile, and for a heartbeat, Clara forgot to breathe. Then, realizing the entire department was staring, she blurted out another apology and fled back to her desk, her heart pounding so hard it drowned out the hum of the office. For the rest of the day, whispers followed her like a shadow. "That's her," someone murmured. "The girl who called the CEO Honey." She wanted to disappear. But as embarrassing as it was, part of her could not stop replaying that look in his eyes, surprised. Yes, but also something else: curiosity. That evening, when the building emptied and only the cleaning crew remained, Clara stood by the window, watching the city shimmer beneath her. The reflection in the glass showed a young woman who did not quite fit into this world but refused to give up trying. Somewhere behind her, she could hear Alexander's office door close. For reasons she could not explain, her heart beat faster again. And neither of them knew that one accidental word, one misplaced honey, was about to change both their lives forever. The next morning, the office buzzed like nothing had happened, but for Clara James, every whisper felt like it carried her name. She could still hear the laughter that had rippled through the hallway after yesterday's accident. Honey. Someone had snickered near the coffee machine. She kept her head down, pretending to be busy with paperwork, praying that if she moved fast enough, she could disappear into the rhythm of the day. But fate had other plans. At exactly 10 o'clock, her supervisor, Miss Reynolds, dropped a folder on her desk. "You are covering the marketing presentation for the CEO this afternoon. Hannah is out sick. You will present her report." Clara's stomach twisted. "Wait me? In front of Mr. Beaumont?" Reynolds looked over her glasses. "You can read, can't you? It is just slides. Try not to call him Honey again." She walked away before Clara could answer. By noon, Clara had rewritten every line of the presentation, desperate to sound professional. She even tucked her hair behind her ears and wore a blazer she had bought at a thrift shop for $8. Still, her palms were damp as she waited outside the conference room. Through the glass, she could see Alexander Beaumont, immaculate as always, reviewing notes with his assistant. The light bounced off his cufflinks like silver lightning. When the meeting began, Clara stood at the front, her voice trembling at first. "Good afternoon, everyone. Today's report outlines engagement metrics for our new ad campaign." She tried to focus, but her eyes caught Alexander's for a split second. He was watching her. Not with judgment, not even with amusement, something quieter. Interest. Halfway through the slides, one page jammed in the projector. She froze. The screen went blank. Someone coughed. Miss Reynolds sighed dramatically. Clara took a deep breath, lifted her chin, and said, "Actually, if I may, I would like to share something different." She opened her notebook, the same one she scribbled in at night, and spoke without notes. "We build campaigns, data models, and algorithms, but behind every number is a person. Our clients do not just buy products, they buy how we make them feel. I call this idea human first. Maybe what people really need is to feel seen." For a moment there was silence. Then a few quiet nods around the table, but the only reaction that mattered came from the end of the room. Alexander set his pen down, leaning slightly forward. "Human first," he repeated, his tone unreadable. "Interesting concept." Clara felt her face heat up. "It was just a thought, sir. Nothing formal." "Sometimes," he said, "the best ideas start that way." He glanced at the rest of the room. "Let us include her proposal in the next internal review. Continue." Her hands shook, but she kept going, her voice steadying with every word. When the presentation ended, Alexander was the first to clap just once, but it was enough to make everyone else follow. After the meeting, Clara collected her notes in a rush. She was halfway to the elevator when she heard his voice behind her. "Miss James." She turned. He was standing there, holding the folder she had forgotten. "You left this." "Oh, thank you, Mr. Beaumont. I did not mean to take more time in there." He interrupted gently. "You spoke well. That project. Human first. Keep developing it." Her breath caught. "You really think it is worth something?" "I think it reminds people that even in business, empathy still matters," he said, his tone soft but firm. "That is rare." Clara smiled, unsure if she should thank him or just run before she embarrassed herself again. "I appreciate that, sir." He nodded once, then walked back toward his office. The elevator doors closed between them, but for the first time since her humiliating mistake, Clara felt lighter. That evening, she returned to her small apartment in Brooklyn and wrote the words "Human First" across a blank page. Her pen trembled slightly as she whispered to herself, "Maybe I am not invisible after all." Outside her window, the city lights blinked like a promise. Somewhere high above that skyline, in his penthouse overlooking the East River, Alexander sat alone at his desk, staring at the same phrase she had spoken hours earlier. Human first. He whispered it once under his breath, and for the first time in years, the words made him smile. Over the next few days, Clara James worked harder than she ever had in her life. She came in early, stayed late, and poured herself into refining the human first proposal. It was the first time someone, especially the CEO, had treated one of her ideas like it mattered. Yet the whispers around the office had not disappeared. Every time she passed a group of coworkers, the murmurs seemed to follow. "She just got lucky," one said near the printer. "Lucky, or something else," another whispered with a smirk. Clara pretended not to hear, but each comment left a mark. Still, she told herself she could not let petty gossip take away what she had earned. At the end of the week, she received an email that made her heart stop. Meeting request. Review human first proposal with CEO Beaumont. It was scheduled for 8 a.m. Monday morning, just her and him. That entire weekend, she barely slept. She reviewed every slide, rehearsed every sentence, even ironed her one good blouse 3 times. She wanted to prove that she belonged here not as a joke, not as the girl who called him honey, but as someone capable, smart, and worthy of respect. Monday came cold and gray. The streets of Manhattan glistened after an early morning rain. Clara stopped by her favorite corner cafe and bought 2 cups of coffee, the same kind she had spilled on that first day, as a small, nervous peace offering. When she arrived at the 32nd floor, the office was quiet. Alexander's door was half open, light spilling out into the hallway. She knocked softly. "Come in," his voice said from inside. He was seated behind a glass desk, sleeves rolled up, a pen in his hand. Even in that casual state, he carried an air of control that filled the room. Clara placed the coffees on the table and smiled nervously. "Good morning, Mr. Beaumont. I thought you might want one. It is, not spilled this time." For the first time, she saw him genuinely laugh. It was short, quiet, but real. "Thank you, Miss James. That is very thoughtful." He gestured to the seat across from him. "Let us see what you have." "Lo." She began her presentation, voice shaking at first but soon steadying as passion took over. She explained how empathy and leadership could improve company culture, how listening to employees could increase creativity and loyalty. Alexander asked questions, not the cold, intimidating kind she expected, but ones that showed he was genuinely thinking. "So you believe kindness can be efficient?" he asked. "Yes," she said, meeting his eyes. "Because kindness builds trust, and trust makes people work better." He leaned back, considering her words. "That is not something you hear in boardrooms often." Clara smiled shyly. Maybe it should be. When she finished, he closed the folder slowly. "You have a rare perspective, Miss James. Most people who step into this office talk about profit margins or market shares. You talk about people. It is just something I care about," she replied softly. He nodded. "That is exactly why it matters." Kozonge. The meeting ended, but neither moved right away. For a few seconds, silence filled the space, warm and oddly comfortable. Finally, he spoke again, his voice quieter. "You know, after your little introduction the other day, I expected to never see you again." Clara laughed nervously. "I almost quit. Twice." "I am glad you did not," he said. Those words stayed with her the entire day. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Clara stayed behind to organize files. Outside the tall windows, the city glowed in gold and silver reflections. As she packed up, she noticed a light still on in the CEO's office. Through the glass, Alexander sat alone, reading a stack of papers. She hesitated, then knocked lightly. "Still working?" He looked up, surprised but not annoyed. "Old habits," he said. "And you?" "I could ask you the same thing," she replied with a small smile. He motioned for her to come in. "Sit for a moment. You have earned it." She stepped closer, trying not to stare at the city view behind him, New York spread out like a galaxy. "It is beautiful up here," she said. "Sometimes," he replied. "Other times it just feels lonely." The honesty in his tone caught her off guard. For a man everyone called untouchable, that word lonely felt like a confession. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "Having all this?" He gave a faint smile. "Every day I wonder if success means anything if you have no one to share it with." Then he paused, as if realizing how much he had revealed. "But that is not your problem to hear." Clara shook her head. "Maybe not, but I think everyone feels that way sometimes. Even people without offices like this." Their eyes met for a moment too long, the kind that makes time slow down. Then a soft buzz broke the silence. His phone lit up with a call labeled board chair. He sighed. "Duty calls," he said, standing. She nodded and turned to leave, but before she stepped out, he said, "Miss James." "Yes, sir?" "Thank you," he said simply, "for reminding me that people still matter." Her heart fluttered. "Any time, Mr. Beaumont." Later that night, Clara sat by her apartment window, sipping instant ramen from a paper cup. The contrast between her world and his could not have been sharper, yet somehow they had met in the middle just for a few moments. She opened her notebook again and scribbled a new line under the words "human first." Even those at the top need someone to look them in the eye and see a person, not a title. Meanwhile, high above the city, Alexander stood in front of the window of his penthouse, looking down at the streets below. He could almost picture her there, walking with her coffee, shoulders hunched against the wind, fighting to make something of herself. He found himself wondering how a single mistake, a clumsy word like honey, had led him to this feeling he could not quite name. For the first time in years, he closed his laptop early, and as the lights of the city blinked like distant stars, both of them, two strangers connected by one foolish accident, fell asleep thinking about the same thing. How a single act of honesty could make the world feel a little less cold. The following week began like any other, but for Clara James everything felt slightly different. The memory of her late-night conversation with Alexander Beaumont lingered in her mind like a soft echo. His words, "Thank you for reminding me that people still matter," had replayed in her head every morning since. It was a quiet Tuesday when fate decided to throw them together again. Clara had just finished typing a memo when an unfamiliar number flashed on her office phone. "Miss James?" a woman's voice said briskly. "This is Claire from the CEO's office. Mr. Beaumont would like you to join him in the lobby in 15 minutes. Bring a notebook." Her heart jumped. "The lobby?" she repeated, unsure she had heard correctly. "Yes. He said you would understand once you get there." 15 minutes later, Clara stood in the grand marble lobby of Beaumont and Fields, clutching her notebook like a shield. The revolving doors opened, and Alexander appeared, wearing a charcoal suit and an expression that looked somewhere between focused and amused. "Good morning, Miss James," he said. "Good morning, sir," she replied, breath slightly uneven. "You asked for me?" "I did," he said. "There is an event I have to attend this morning, a tech partnership meeting downtown. My assistant is out sick, and I need someone to take notes and observe the presentations." Her eyes widened. "You want me to come with you?" "Unless you have a better excuse to avoid work," he said lightly. She shook her head quickly. "No, of course not. I just did not expect it." Trepter. "Neither did I," he admitted as they stepped outside, where a black sedan waited at the curb. The drive through Manhattan was quiet at first. The city rolled by in flashes of glass towers and yellow taxis, the rhythm of horns and footsteps filling the spaces between their words. Alexander scrolled through his phone while Clara tried to sit still, her notebook balanced on her lap. "You look nervous," he said without looking up. "I am trying not to embarrass myself, sir," she replied honestly. He glanced at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You do not strike me as someone who embarrasses easily anymore." "That is only because I already called my boss honey in front of half the company," she said before realizing how blunt that sounded. He chuckled. "Fair point." The sound of his laughter filled the car, low and genuine. It made her chest tighten in a way she could not explain. The meeting was held in a sleek conference hall downtown, full of glass screens and polished accents. The moment they entered, a few executives turned and whispered. Clara could feel the attention instantly. She was the only assistant in the room, and being beside the CEO made her presence even more noticeable. Alexander handed her a copy of the agenda. "Stay close, take notes, and do not worry about them," he said quietly. "People talk because they wish they could be the ones standing next to you." She looked up, startled, but he was already walking toward the stage. Throughout the morning, Clara listened carefully, jotting down every detail. But occasionally, her eyes drifted toward him, confident, calm, speaking with authority, but never arrogance. Watching him command the room reminded her why everyone both feared and admired him. During a short break, one of the other executives, a man named Carter, approached Clara with a smirk. "You are the new assistant, right? Heard you are getting pretty close to the boss." Clara's cheeks flushed. "I am here to work, Mr. Carter." He chuckled. "Of course. Just saying he usually does not bring anyone from your department to these meetings." Before she could reply, Alexander returned. His gaze shifted from Carter to Clara, sharp and protective. "Is there a problem here?" Carter straightened immediately. "None at all, sir." Alexander gave a brief nod. "Good. Then perhaps you should focus on your next presentation." When the man walked away, Clara exhaled quietly. "You did not have to do that," she said. "I know," he replied, his tone softening. "But I wanted to." After the meeting ended, they stopped for coffee at a small cafe near Central Park. The atmosphere was calmer, the air scented with roasted beans and spring rain. Alexander ordered black coffee. Clara chose caramel latte. They sat by the window, watching people hurry by with umbrellas and briefcases. "I was impressed today," he said after a moment. "You handled yourself well." "Thank you," she said, surprised by how much his approval meant. "I was terrified, actually." Fear is not a weakness, Miss James. It means you care." She smiled. "You sound like my journal." He raised an eyebrow. "You keep a journal?" "Every night," she admitted. "It helps me remember that even on the bad days, something good happened." "Then what will you write tonight?" he asked. She looked at him, the city reflected in the glass between them. "That I learned my boss is not as terrifying as everyone says." He laughed quietly. "I will take that as progress." Back at the office, the gossip spread again faster than wildfire. People whispered about how the CEO had personally taken Clara to a private meeting, how they had coffee together afterward. She tried to ignore it, focusing on her work, but the weight of their stares was impossible to miss. By late afternoon, she overheard a group of colleagues near the break room. "Of course she got promoted," one said. "She is his favorite now." "Some people know how to play the game," another added. The words stung, but Clara refused to let them see her falter. She gathered her things and left quietly. That night, as she rode the subway back to Brooklyn, she stared at her reflection in the dark window. For a moment, doubt crept in. Maybe she did not belong in that world after all. Maybe this was all just a temporary illusion. But then she remembered Alexander's words. Fear is not a weakness. It means you care. No. When she reached her apartment, she opened her notebook and wrote another line beneath human first. Do not let other people define the meaning of your worth. At the same hour, Alexander stood in his office, looking down at the city lights. His assistant had returned and asked about the meeting, but he had said very little. The truth was, he had not been able to stop thinking about Clara, about the way she carried herself with quiet strength despite every rumor, every judgment. He found himself wondering how someone who had so little authority could possess so much dignity. On his desk lay a single page from her proposal. In the corner, in her neat handwriting, she had written a small reminder, "Empathy is leadership." He smiled to himself and murmured under his breath, "Maybe she is right." For the first time in a long while, Alexander realized that leadership was not only about being followed, it was about being understood. And that realization began, strangely enough, with one mistaken word that still echoed softly in his memory. Honey. The following days moved like a quiet rhythm. Clara James kept her head down, determined to ignore the whispers that still floated around the office. Her focus was on finishing the internal draft for the Human First initiative. It was no longer just an idea in her notebook. It had become a real project. But as the work deepened, so did the feeling that her world was slowly intertwining with Alexander Beaumont's in ways she had not expected. Late one evening, the 32nd floor was nearly empty. Clara sat in the break room, flipping through reports under the faint hum of fluorescent light. A knock came at the glass door. She looked up, startled. Alexander stood there, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might still be here," he said as he entered. "You are starting to make me look lazy, Miss James." She smiled tiredly. "I doubt anyone could outwork you, sir." "Maybe," he said with a soft chuckle. "But even I know when to take a break." He handed her one of the cups. No caramel this time. Straight latte. "You said you wanted to try it." She blinked in surprise. "You remembered?" "I try to remember things that matter," he replied simply. For a moment neither spoke. The office felt different at night, less intimidating, almost human. They stood by the window, the city sprawling beneath them like an ocean of lights. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "I stay late just to remind myself why I started all this. The view helps." "Arding." Clara glanced at him. "And what do you see when you look out there?" He paused. "People who trust this company with their futures. People I am supposed to lead. But lately, I keep wondering if I am really doing that or if I am just keeping the machine running. That is what the Human First project is about," she said softly, "making sure the machine does not forget the people inside it." He turned to her, studying her expression. "You believe that strongly, do you not?" "I have to," she said, "because I have worked in places where no one cared. I know how that feels. And I never want anyone else to feel it." He nodded, something flickering in his eyes, a mix of respect and something gentler. A week later, Alexander surprised everyone by announcing an internal event, the Human First Workshop. The goal was to collect ideas from employees on how to improve work culture and well-being. To everyone's shock, he named Clara as co-lead of the program. The news spread instantly. Some congratulated her. Others muttered accusations. "She must have connections," one said. "She spilled coffee and got a promotion," another sneered. Clara tried to brush it off, but it wore her down. She avoided the cafeteria, ate lunch at her desk, and left the office later than usual to escape the stares. One evening, as she packed her bag, she found a small note on her keyboard. In neat handwriting it said, "Do not shrink because they cannot grow. A.B." Her chest tightened. She looked toward the glass office across the floor. The lights inside were still on. When the day of the workshop arrived, the conference hall was packed. Clara stood beside Alexander at the front, feeling a wave of nerves crash over her. She had rehearsed her opening speech 100 times, but now her throat felt dry. Alexander noticed. He leaned closer and whispered, "You have this, Miss James. Just be yourself." She nodded and began. "When we say human first, we mean remembering that no idea, no system, no company can thrive without people. Every small act of kindness, every bit of empathy we show, those are the things that build real success." The room grew quiet. She spoke with sincerity, her voice steadying with each word. When she finished, the audience clapped genuine applause, not polite formality. Clara's heart swelled with relief. Alexander stepped forward to close the event. Miss James reminded us today that leadership is not just about results, he said. It is about responsibility to each other. That is something worth protecting. Their eyes met briefly, and in that look was an unspoken gratitude. That night the city was soft with mist. Clara walked home through the quiet streets, her heels clicking against the wet pavement. She replayed the day in her mind, the pride, the relief, and that moment when he had looked at her like she truly belonged. She reached her small apartment, hung her coat, and opened her notebook. Under the words "human first," she added a new line. Sometimes, kindness changes the world one decision at a time. Across town, Alexander sat in his penthouse office. Lights dimmed. He was supposed to review quarterly numbers, but instead, he was staring at the event photo Clara speaking confidently before the crowd. There was something about her that refused to leave his thoughts. Her sincerity, her courage, her refusal to let bitterness win. Claire, his longtime assistant, entered quietly. "It was a good event, sir," she said. "It was," he replied. "Better than I expected." She hesitated. "You know people are talking." "I am aware," he said, setting the photo down. "Let them. If people choose to gossip about empathy, that says more about them than it does about us." Claire smiled faintly and left the room. Alexander leaned back, gazing out at the city lights that stretched toward the horizon. He had spent years building walls around himself. Walls made of glass, money, and power. But somehow, a woman who once called him honey by mistake had found the smallest crack in those walls and let a little light in. He lifted his cup of coffee, now cold, and whispered to no one in particular, "Human first." The words no longer sounded like a business slogan. They felt like a promise. And somewhere in Brooklyn, a young woman who once believed she was invisible was unknowingly teaching a millionaire how to be human again. The weeks that followed felt like a slow, quiet transformation inside Beaumont and Fields. What began as a small internal project had turned into something real. Employees started opening up more, ideas flowed freely, and the atmosphere in the office softened. For the first time in years, people were talking about purpose instead of deadlines. And at the center of it all was Clara James. Her schedule became a blur of meetings, interviews, and brainstorming sessions. The Human First initiative had caught attention not just within the company, but also across the corporate network. Clara never sought the spotlight, but her sincerity made people listen. Still, the more her work flourished, the more complicated her emotions toward Alexander Beaumont became. She tried to tell herself that he was just her boss as a mentor, maybe even a friend, but something about the way he looked at her sometimes made her pulse skip a beat. One rainy afternoon, while she was packing up to leave, Alexander appeared at her desk holding an umbrella. "You should not walk in this weather," he said. "Let me give you a ride." She hesitated. "It is just a little rain." "Rain or not, I insist," he replied. "Consider it a professional courtesy." She smiled. "If you say so, Mr. Beaumont." They walked together through the quiet lobby, the sound of rain tapping softly against the glass doors. Outside, the city shimmered under a gray sky. He opened the umbrella, holding it above them both. The space beneath it felt strangely intimate. As the car pulled away from the curb, Clara stared out the window. "I never imagined I would be working this closely with you," she said softly. Alexander glanced at her. "Do you regret it?" She turned toward him. "Not at all. It has been life-changing." His expression softened. "It has been for me too." They fell silent again, but the silence was warm this time, comfortable. When the car stopped in front of her apartment building, Clara thanked him for the ride. Before stepping out, she added, "You know, people will talk if they see this." He smiled faintly. "They already do, Miss James. Let them." The next morning, rumors exploded across the company. Someone had taken a photo of Alexander's car parked outside Clara's building. It spread through the office chat within hours. By lunchtime, everyone had seen it. Clara walked into the break room and felt the shift. Instantly, conversations paused, eyes followed her. A few people whispered loud enough for her to hear. "So much for Human First. Looks like she found a faster way to the top. Guess the CEO's empathy has limits." Tao. Her throat tightened. She wanted to defend herself, but any word she said would only feed the gossip. She returned to her desk and focused on her screen, pretending she did not hear the laughter behind her. Later that day, she received an internal message from the communications department. Miss James, please report to the executive floor at 4 p.m. Her stomach dropped. When she entered Alexander's office, he was standing by the window, his expression unreadable. I assume you have seen the photo, he said. Yes, she whispered. I did not know someone took it. I swear. I swear. He raised a hand gently. I know. You have nothing to explain to me. Then why am I here? Because others think you do, he said quietly, and I need to handle it before this becomes something bigger. She looked at him, eyes glistening. Do you think I have done something wrong? He met her gaze. No, but perception can be cruel, and in this world, rumors can destroy what truth builds. She nodded, struggling to hold back tears. Maybe it would be easier if I stepped down from the project. His voice hardened slightly. Absolutely not. You earned your place here. But if it hurts your reputation, then let it. He interrupted. Because I will not let anyone diminish what you have done. There was a long pause. The rain outside beat against the glass, steady and cold. Finally, she said quietly, I do not want to be the reason people stop believing in what we are doing. He stepped closer, his voice soft. You are the reason they started believing in it, Clara. Her breath caught. You said my name, she whispered. He smiled faintly. It felt right. For a moment, the room held its breath. The city stretched behind them, blurred by the rain. Then Clara turned toward the door, needing air before her emotions showed. Thank you, Mr. Beaumont, she said, her voice shaking slightly, for standing up for me. Always, he replied. That night, Clara walked home without an umbrella, letting the rain soak through her coat. She did not cry, but her heart felt heavy. It was strange how success could feel so close to heartbreak. When she reached her apartment, she placed her notebook on the table and opened to a fresh page. She wrote, The higher you climb, the louder the wind becomes. But kindness is the anchor that keeps you steady. Meanwhile, in his penthouse, Alexander sat at his desk long after midnight. The city lights flickered like restless thoughts across the windows. On his computer screen was a headline draft for the company's newsletter, Beaumont and Fields launches new employee initiative, Human First. He read the first paragraph, then deleted a line. He replaced it with new words. Inspired by the work of team member Clara James, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. The scandal might fade, but the truth would not. She had reminded him what real leadership looked like: vulnerability, courage, and integrity. He reached for his phone, typed a short message, then hesitated before pressing send. Finally, he set the phone down. Some things, he thought, should be said face to face. Outside, the rain eased into silence, and somewhere across the city, a young woman who had once been invisible was slowly learning that her voice had power enough to make even a millionaire listen. The next morning came heavy with fog, the kind that seemed to blur the skyline and soften the city's usual rush. Inside Beaumont and Fields, tension hung just as thick. The rumor about Clara James and Alexander Beaumont had not gone away, it had evolved. Every conversation paused when she entered a room. Every polite smile hid an unspoken judgment. Still, Clara walked with quiet resolve. She had promised herself that no matter what they said, she would keep doing her work. But as she reached her desk, she noticed an email that made her heart sink. Meeting request. Department evaluation. 3 p.m. with board oversight. Jago. It was signed by Margaret Holt, the head of operations, known for her icy precision and dislike for anything that disrupted the company's image. When Clara stepped into the glass conference room that afternoon, the air felt cold. 3 board members sat at the long table. Margaret's expression was as sharp as the silver pen in her hand. Miss James, she began. You have been leading the Human First initiative for several weeks now. It has generated attention, both positive and otherwise. Clara stood still. I understand, ma'am. Do you? Margaret's tone cut through the air. Because some of us believe this program has become less about leadership development and more about publicity. And quite frankly, your involvement with the CEO has raised questions. Clara swallowed hard. There is no involvement. Mr. Beaumont and I only work together. Margaret leaned back. You expect us to believe that? Before Clara could respond, a new voice came from the doorway. You should. Gumpri. The entire room turned. Alexander Beaumont stood there, tall and calm, his presence immediately commanding attention. Mr. Beaumont, Margaret said tightly, this is a closed review. I am aware, he replied, stepping forward. And since this review involves a project I personally approved, I have every right to be here. He stopped beside Clara, his tone steady but cold. Miss James has done nothing but work tirelessly to improve this company. If anyone here questions her integrity, they are questioning mine as well. Margaret's eyes narrowed. You are aware of the optics this creates. I am aware of the truth, he said. And the truth is that you have a culture problem. The Human First Project was meant to fix that. Perhaps it is doing exactly what it should, forcing people to look in the mirror. The room went silent. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to fade. Clara felt her pulse racing. She had never seen him like this, controlled, yet fiercely protective. Finally, Margaret exhaled. Very well. The board will review your statement, Mr. Beaumont. Miss James, you may go. Clara gathered her folder and nodded respectfully. When she stepped out into the hallway, her knees nearly gave out. She had been prepared to defend herself, but not for him to walk in like that. A few minutes later, Alexander followed her. You did not have to face that alone, he said. She turned to him, eyes glistening. You should not have done that. It will only make things worse for you. Let me worry about that, he said softly. I will not stand by while good people get punished for doing the right thing. Clara shook her head. You cannot keep rescuing me, Mr. Beaumont. He met her eyes, his voice low. Maybe I do not want to stop. The words hung in the air, dangerous and honest. She did not know what to say, so she looked away, pretending to adjust her papers. I should get back to work, she murmured. He nodded slowly. Of course. But Clara, her name again. It made her heart stumble. Do not let them make you doubt yourself. What you have built matters. You matter. She met his gaze, searching for something to say, but no words came. So she just nodded and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the corridor. That evening, Clara returned to her apartment, exhausted but strangely calm. She replayed the moment he had stood beside her in that boardroom, his voice, his conviction, the way he had made her feel safe even in the middle of humiliation. For the first time, she began to wonder if the connection between them was more than admiration or gratitude. She opened her notebook again and wrote, Sometimes, courage is not about fighting alone. Sometimes it is about allowing someone to stand beside you. Across the city, Alexander sat in his office, the night pressing softly against the glass. Claire, his assistant, entered quietly. The board will not like what you did today, she said. I know, he replied. Then why take the risk? He looked out at the skyline. Because for the first time in a long while, I believe in something real, and I will not let fear destroy it. Claire watched him for a moment, then smiled faintly. You sound human again. When she left, he stood alone, gazing at the light stretching over Manhattan. Somewhere down there, a woman who had once called him honey without meaning to, was changing everything he thought he knew about power, trust, and what it meant to lead. And though he did not say it out loud, he knew it to be true. She was the reason his world no longer felt so cold. The next few days passed, like a storm brewing quietly above Beaumont and Fields. The tension from the board meeting spread through the halls like invisible static. Even though no one dared mention it directly, everyone knew something had shifted. Alexander Beaumont had publicly defended Clara James, and that single act had turned whispers into noise. By Thursday, the company gossip had reached its peak. Anonymous posts appeared on internal forums, accusing Clara of favoritism and manipulation. One even claimed the entire Human First program was a cover-up for her personal relationship with the CEO. When Clara saw the messages, her hands trembled. She had expected judgment, but not cruelty. The words felt heavier because they came from her colleagues, the very people the project was meant to help. That evening, she stayed late at her desk, staring blankly at the computer screen. The office was dark except for the soft glow of city lights filtering through the glass. She rubbed her temples, trying to keep herself from crying. A voice broke the silence. You should not read those comments. She looked up. Alexander was standing near her desk, his tie loosened, his expression tired. I tried not to, she said, forcing a weak smile. But it is hard to look away when people are tearing you apart in your own company. He stepped closer. Clara, listen to me. You have done nothing wrong. Those people are reacting to change, and change terrifies them. Lever, she shook her head. They are reacting to me. I have become the easy target. Then let me take the hit, he said quietly. You cannot do that. If you defend me again, it will only make things worse, she said, her voice cracking. I do not want to be the reason your reputation suffers. He paused, his tone soft but firm. Reputation means nothing if you lose your integrity along the way. You taught me that." The sincerity in his voice almost undid her. She looked down, blinking back tears. "I do not know how to keep doing this, Alexander." He hesitated before speaking her first name again. "Then do not do it alone. Let me help." She looked at him, the weight of exhaustion and gratitude colliding in her chest. For a moment, she wished the world outside that office did not exist, just the quiet, the city lights, and the man who somehow saw her even when everyone else chose not to. But before she could respond, a knock came at the glass wall. It was Claire, Alexander's assistant, holding a folder. Her eyes darted between the two of them, recognizing the tension in the air. "Mr. Beaumont, the finance division, is asking for your approval on tomorrow's press release." "I will be there in a minute," he said, not taking his eyes off Clara. Claire gave a polite nod and disappeared down the hall. Alexander exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "We cannot keep meeting like this after hours. It is giving them more to talk about." "Yautung." "I know," Clara said softly, "but this project it matters too much to abandon." He nodded slowly. "Then let us do something they will not expect." Her brows furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Let us open it up," he said. "Invite the press. Bring transparency to the project. If people see the impact, they will have nothing left to twist." Clara's eyes widened. "That is risky." "Everything worth doing is," he replied. "And if the board tries to stop us, they will have to do it in public." Code. For the first time that day, she smiled. "You are serious." "Dead serious," he said. "Tomorrow morning, I want you to prepare a public summary of the Human First program, the goals, the progress, the testimonials. We will announce a media preview next week." Her confidence flickered back. "All right, I will do it." "Good," he said with a small smile. "And Clara, thank you for not giving up." She watched him walk away, realizing just how far their lives had intertwined. Somewhere along the way, the line between mentor and equal had blurred. That night, back in her apartment, Clara drafted the press summary. She read every sentence carefully, making sure it was about the work, not her. She wanted the world to see the message, not the rumors. But as she finished, her phone buzzed with a new notification, an anonymous message. "You will regret this. People like you never last long in places like his." Her chest tightened. She closed the laptop and sat still, the sound of rain echoing outside her window. For the first time since the project began, Clara felt fear creep in, not of failure, but of being destroyed for trying to do something good. Across town, Alexander stood by his penthouse window, looking out at the skyline. Claire's warning echoed in his mind. If you keep protecting her, they will come after you next. He did not care. He opened the file containing the upcoming company statement and replaced one line at the bottom. It now read, "This initiative represents the heart of Beaumont and Fields, where leadership means compassion and progress begins with humanity." "One." He leaned back, whispering under his breath, "Let them talk. The truth will speak louder." Outside, lightning flashed faintly over the city, but for once, Alexander did not feel the weight of the storm. Somewhere in that same skyline, a woman he admired was preparing to face the world with courage, and whether she knew it or not, he was already standing behind her, ready to take every hit that came her way. The morning of the media event arrived faster than anyone expected. The lobby of Beaumont and Fields was transformed into a minimalist stage-white banners, soft lights, and a digital screen that read, "Human First, building empathy into the future." For most employees, it was just another company announcement. But for Clara James, it felt like walking into the center of a storm she had helped create. She stood backstage, clutching a folder so tightly her knuckles turned white. The press was everywhere: reporters, photographers, even bloggers who loved controversy more than facts. Somewhere in that crowd were people waiting to see her fall. From the stage, Alexander Beaumont was addressing the audience. His voice carried calm authority. "Our company was built on innovation," he said. "But innovation means nothing if it forgets the human heart behind it. The Human First initiative is not just a policy, it is a promise." As he spoke, cameras flashed. The atmosphere felt electric, almost too perfect. Clara took a deep breath, repeating her mantra silently. "Stay calm, stay true." Then, as Alexander concluded, he gestured toward her. "And none of this would exist without the work of one person, Miss Clara James." The crowd turned. The applause began polite but grew stronger. Clara stepped onto the stage, her heels echoing against the floor. Under the bright lights, the room seemed to spin for a moment. She smiled, steadying herself. "Thank you," she began. "When we started this project, it was just an idea, a belief that kindness and productivity are not opposites. Every company can grow and still keep its people at the heart of its mission." Her voice was calm, but inside, she felt every pair of eyes watching, judging, dissecting. And then, from the back of the room, a voice called out, "Miss James, how did it feel to be chosen by the CEO for such a visible project? Some might say your relationship gave you an advantage." The question hung in the air like a knife. Cameras turned toward her. A few reporters lifted their phones, recording every second. Clara froze for half a beat. Then, before she could answer, Alexander stepped forward. "Let me address that," he said firmly. The crowd murmured. Miss James was not chosen because of any relationship. She was chosen because her idea was better than anything we had seen in years. If believing in empathy is a disadvantage, then I suppose we are both guilty. The tension cracked into whispers. Clara exhaled softly, gratitude flickering through her chest. She turned toward him, and their eyes met his steady, hers full of quiet disbelief. The rest of the event continued smoothly, but the energy in the room had changed. What was meant to be a celebration had become a public confrontation. When the last photo was taken and the press began to leave, Alexander motioned for Clara to follow him upstairs. Inside his office, the air was still, the soundproof walls closing out the chaos below. "You did well," he said, pouring himself a glass of water. "Better than I expected, given the ambush." "I am not sure if that was a win," she admitted. "You saw how they looked at us." "They looked," he said, "because they finally saw something real." And she sat across from him, exhaustion softening her expression. "You keep saying that, but real things come with consequences." "I know," he said quietly, "but I would rather face consequences for telling the truth than live behind an image that means nothing." There was a pause. The rain outside began again, faint against the glass. "Alexander," she said softly, "you did not have to defend me in front of everyone." "Yes, I did," he replied, his gaze steady. "Because I will not let them erase what you have built. Not this time." His voice carried a conviction that made her chest ache. "You keep putting yourself at risk for me," she said. "Why?" He hesitated, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his tone low but sure. "Because for the first time, I believe in someone more than I believe in my company." The words hit harder than she expected. Her breath caught. The air between them thickened, filled with the kind of silence that meant everything. But before either of them could speak again, a knock came at the door. It was Claire, looking uneasy. "Sir, the board wants to see you immediately." They were watching the press feed. Alexander's jaw tightened. Of course they were. Clara stood, nerves knotting in her stomach. "Go, you should not keep them waiting." He turned to her, eyes soft but resolute. "Whatever happens next, do not regret today." "Lou." She nodded, forcing a small smile. "I will not." As he left, the door closed softly behind him, and the office felt suddenly too big, too quiet. Clara sank into the chair, her heart still racing. She stared out at the gray city below, unsure whether she had just helped build something beautiful or set it all on fire. She reached for her notebook, flipping to the last page, and wrote, "When you choose to stand for something true, the world will test how much you mean it." Ho. Downstairs, the echoes of the press conference faded, but the story had only just begun. The morning of the media event arrived faster than anyone expected. The lobby of Beaumont and Fields was transformed into a minimalist stage-white banners, soft lights, and a digital screen that read, "Human First, Building Empathy into the Future." For most employees, it was just another company announcement. But for Clara James, it felt like walking into the center of a storm she had helped create. She stood backstage, clutching a folder so tightly her knuckles turned white. The press was everywhere, reporters, photographers, even bloggers who loved controversy more than facts. Somewhere in that crowd were people waiting to see her fall. From the stage, Alexander Beaumont was addressing the audience. His voice carried calm authority. "Our company was built on innovation," he said. "But innovation means nothing if it forgets the human heart behind it. The Human First initiative is not just a policy, it is a promise." As he spoke, cameras flashed. The atmosphere felt electric, almost too perfect. Clara took a deep breath, repeating her mantra silently. "Stay calm, stay true." Then, as Alexander concluded, he gestured toward her. "And none of this would exist without the work of one person, Miss Clara James." The crowd turned. The applause began polite but grew stronger. Clara stepped onto the stage, her heels echoing against the floor. Under the bright lights, the room seemed to spin for a moment. She smiled, steadying herself. "Thank you," she began. "When we started this project, it was just an idea as a belief that kindness and productivity are not opposites. Every company can grow and still keep its people at the heart of its mission." Her voice was calm, but inside, she felt every pair of eyes watching, judging, dissecting. And then, from the back of the room, a voice called out, "Miss James, how did it feel to be chosen by the CEO for such a visible project? Some might say your relationship gave you an advantage." The question hung in the air like a knife. Cameras turned toward her. A few reporters lifted their phones, recording every second. Clara froze for half a beat. Then, before she could answer, Alexander stepped forward. "Let me address that," he said firmly. The crowd murmured. Miss James was not chosen because of any relationship. She was chosen because her idea was better than anything we had seen in years. If believing in empathy is a disadvantage, then I suppose we are both guilty. The tension cracked into whispers. Clara exhaled softly, gratitude flickering through her chest. She turned toward him, and their eyes met his steady, hers full of quiet disbelief. The rest of the event continued smoothly, but the energy in the room had changed. What was meant to be a celebration had become a public confrontation. When the last photo was taken and the press began to leave, Alexander motioned for Clara to follow him upstairs. Inside his office, the air was still, the soundproof walls closing out the chaos below. "You did well," he said, pouring himself a glass of water. "Better than I expected, given the ambush." "I am not sure if that was a win," she admitted. "You saw how they looked at us." "They looked," he said, "because they finally saw something real." "Yogol." She sat across from him, exhaustion softening her expression. "You keep saying that, but real things come with consequences." "I know," he said quietly, "but I would rather face consequences for telling the truth than live behind an image that means nothing." There was a pause. The rain outside began again, faint against the glass. "Alexander," she said softly, "you did not have to defend me in front of everyone." "Yes, I did," he replied, his gaze steady. "Because I will not let them erase what you have built. Not this time." His voice carried a conviction that made her chest ache. "You keep putting yourself at risk for me," she said. "Why?" He hesitated, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke, his tone low but sure. "Because for the first time, I believe in someone more than I believe in my company." The words hit harder than she expected. Her breath caught. The air between them thickened, filled with the kind of silence that meant everything. But before either of them could speak again, a knock came at the door. It was Claire, looking uneasy. "Sir, the board wants to see you immediately." They were watching the press feed. Alexander's jaw tightened. Of course they were. Clara stood, nerves knotting in her stomach. "Go. You should not keep them waiting." He turned to her, eyes soft but resolute. "Whatever happens next, do not regret today." "Fool." She nodded, forcing a small smile. "I will not." As he left, the door closed softly behind him, and the office felt suddenly too big, too quiet. Clara sank into the chair, her heart still racing. She stared out at the gray city below, unsure whether she had just helped build something beautiful or set it all on fire. She reached for her notebook, flipping to the last page, and wrote, "When you choose to stand for something true, the world will test how much you mean it." Odin. Downstairs, the echoes of the press conference faded, but the story had only just begun. The week after Clara's resignation felt like a long pause the whole city could feel. Beaumont and Fields was quieter than usual, its once busy corridors filled with uncertainty. Employees whispered about what might happen next. Would Alexander Beaumont step down, or would the board remove him? The human-first project that had once filled the company with energy now hung in limbo, like a story missing its final chapter. Alexander showed up every morning, but something in him had changed. He no longer walked with the brisk confidence people admired. He went straight to his office, shut the door, and stayed there until nightfall. The glass walls that once reflected ambition now reflected exhaustion. Meanwhile, across Brooklyn, Clara James tried to return to normal life, though normal no longer fit her. She had found part-time work at a community arts center, helping organize local charity events. It was quieter, gentler, but each time she looked at the skyline, she thought of him. One evening, after a volunteer meeting, she stepped outside into the crisp autumn air. The sun had already set, and Manhattan glowed across the river, golden against the dusk. She wrapped her coat tighter and whispered to herself, "You did the right thing," but her voice trembled as she said it. At the same time, in the company's upper floors, Alexander stood by the window of his corner office. The city lights shimmered below like a reflection of his own restless thoughts. He held a letter in his hand, her resignation, now worn at the edges. Claire, his assistant, entered quietly. "They want an answer," she said softly. "The board expects you to sign the compliance statement tomorrow." He turned. "You mean the statement where I pretend none of this ever happened?" "Yes," she said carefully. "It would protect the company and your position." He looked down at the letter again. "If keeping my title means erasing her work, then maybe I do not want it." Claire sighed. "You will lose everything you built." He nodded slowly. "Then I will build something new, something she would be proud of." Claire gave a small smile. "You really care about her, do you not?" He hesitated. "I did not expect to. But she saw the one thing I stopped seeing in myself, humanity, and I cannot go back to the man I was before that." 2 days later, a new headline appeared online. Beaumont and Field's CEO steps down. Amidst ethics dispute launches independent foundation, focused on workplace empathy. The article spread quickly. The press called it shocking. Investors called it foolish. But to Alexander, it felt like freedom. He spent that day packing his office in silence. He left behind his custom desk, his nameplate, and his glass-walled view of the city. The only thing he took was a small notebook, Clara's. She had once left it by accident after a meeting. Inside were the first handwritten sketches of Human First. At the bottom of the last page, in her handwriting, was a line he had never noticed before. "Empathy is not a weakness. It is the highest form of strength." He smiled quietly. That weekend, Clara received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a letter and a folded event invitation. "Dear Miss James, some stories do not end, they evolve. I wanted you to know that the Human First initiative will continue under a new name. The Beaumont Foundation for Ethical Leadership. You inspired it. You inspired me. There will be a small exhibit opening this Friday at the downtown gallery. I would like you to see it if you can. Alexander, my Tisa." She read the letter twice before realizing her hands were shaking. He had done it. He had kept the promise. Friday came quickly. Clara arrived at the gallery in a simple navy dress, unsure what to expect. The space was warm and filled with gentle music. On the walls were photographs, candid portraits of employees, workers, and volunteers from across the city. At the center stood a single-frame display, her original Human First logo drawn in pencil, the one from her old notebook. Beneath it, a plaque read, "Inspired by the work of Clara James, because true leadership begins with kindness." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. As she stood there, a familiar voice spoke softly behind her. "I was afraid you would not come." She turned. Alexander was there, dressed simply, no longer the untouchable CEO, but still unmistakably himself. "I had to see it for myself," she said. "You actually did it." He smiled. "You did it first. I just followed." Numdo. For a long moment they stood in silence, surrounded by the glow of the lights and the quiet hum of the gallery. Finally, Clara said softly, "So, what happens now?" Alexander looked at her, eyes warm but steady. "Now we build again. Not as boss and employee, just two people trying to make something better." She nodded slowly, her heart lighter than it had been in months. "Then let us begin." Two. And as the crowd moved around them, their eyes met two people who had lost everything the world valued, only to find what truly mattered: respect, purpose, and the kind of connection that does not need a title to survive. The night of the gallery opening would be remembered by both of them for years. After months of chaos, headlines, and rumors, everything had gone still. The Human First logo, once a sketch on Clara James's notepad, was now displayed in gold lettering above a white wall. Beneath it, people from all walks of life smiled at photos of real employees, handwritten stories, and small artifacts that symbolized acts of kindness inside workplaces. Alexander Beaumont had turned the controversy into a movement. The foundation's launch event was not about power or business anymore, it was about people. Clara stood quietly near the main exhibit, watching a group of young interns reading a quote printed in bold letters. "Kindness is not weakness, it is leadership." Trey. She could not stop the emotion that filled her chest. For so long, she had been afraid that her mistake, the one little word, honey, had defined her. But now, standing here, She realized it had simply revealed who she truly was. Alexander walked toward her, the crowd parting slightly as he approached. He no longer carried the stiffness of a man guarding his image. There was calm in his voice when he said, "You always said it was about people. Now look at them." She smiled softly. "They are the proof you were right to believe in it." He shook his head. "No, Clara, I believed in you. This was your vision." Before she could answer, a young woman stepped forward to greet them. "Mr. Beaumont, Miss James, thank you for starting this," she said with shy excitement. "I used to hate coming to work. Now our office has this program, and it feels different. People actually talk to each other." Clara's eyes glistened. "That means everything to hear. Thank you for telling us." When the woman left, Alexander said quietly, "You see, this is your legacy." She looked around the room, her voice soft. "I do not want it to be just mine. I want it to belong to everyone who chooses to do better." He smiled at that. "You have not changed at all." "Maybe a little," she said. "I finally stopped apologizing for caring too much." There was a pause, a comfortable one. Music drifted softly in the background. Around them, people laughed and took photos. But the noise faded as the two of them stood near the center of the gallery. Alexander reached into his pocket and handed her a small envelope. "This was supposed to be part of the exhibit, but I wanted you to see it first." Clara frowned, curious. She opened the envelope and found a note inside yellowed at the edges, written in her own handwriting from months ago. It was the sticky note she had once left on her desk, the one that said, "Tomorrow will be kinder." She looked up, startled. "You kept this?" "I did," he said simply. "It reminded me why we started." Her eyes softened. "That note was just a small thing. Small things start big changes," he said. Then he pointed toward the far end of the gallery, where a framed quote was mounted under soft light. She read it aloud, her voice trembling. "You were right, honey." She turned to him, half laughing, half crying. "You did not." "I did," he said, smiling. It felt fitting. After all, that one mistake changed both our lives. The crowd around them began to applaud as a presenter announced the close of the evening. Alexander extended his hand toward her. "Come with me." They stepped outside into the cool night air. The city was quiet, its lights reflecting off the wet streets from an earlier rain. For a moment, they stood under the same awning where she had once spilled coffee and called her boss honey. "It all started right here," she said softly. He nodded, and ended exactly where it should, with something real. She looked at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "So, what happens now?" Alexander smiled gently. "Now, we keep our promise to make tomorrow kinder." The two of them walked down the sidewalk, their reflections gliding side by side in the glass storefronts. Behind them, the gallery lights glowed like a quiet heartbeat against the city's darkness. For the first time in a long time, Clara felt no fear, only peace. The mistake that had once humiliated her had become the seed of something extraordinary. As the camera of memory faded on their silhouettes, her voice seemed to echo softly, like a closing line from a story that had come full circle. Sometimes, it takes one wrong word to find the right person, and one small act of kindness to change the world. The morning after the gallery event, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the downtown studio where the new Beaumont Foundation would begin its work. The space was simple white walls, wooden desks, and the quiet hum of possibility. Clara James arrived early, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She set one on the table beside the window and smiled to herself. It had been almost a year since that first spilled cup had started everything, and somehow, here they were again, still building, still believing. A few minutes later, Alexander Beaumont entered, his tie slightly loose, sleeves rolled up. He looked lighter, younger, as though the weight of titles and expectations had finally fallen away. "I thought you might need this," she said, pushing the coffee toward him. He smiled. "Still trying to keep me caffeinated?" "Someone has to make sure you do not forget to take breaks," she said teasingly. He took a sip and looked out at the morning light. "It feels different now, does it not?" "It does," she said softly. "Quite or honest?" Alexander nodded. "I used to think success meant being above everyone else. But now I know it is about standing beside the right people." "Hull?" She smiled, her voice gentle. "And I used to think mistakes ruined everything. But sometimes, they just show us where we are supposed to be." He turned to her, eyes full of warmth. "Clara, there is something I have been meaning to ask." Her breath caught slightly. "What is it?" He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small velvet box on the table. Inside was a simple silver ring, elegant but modest, engraved with 2 words, "Human First." She stared at it, speechless. He spoke quietly. "This is not about grand gestures or making headlines. It is about promising that we will never forget what brought us here: kindness, courage, and the belief that even one mistake can lead to something extraordinary." Her eyes filled with tears. "Are you asking me to?" He smiled softly. "To stay, to build this life with me, to keep reminding me to be human." For a long moment she said nothing. Then she nodded, tears turning into laughter. "You already know my answer." "Yentong." He slipped the ring onto her finger, the silver catching the morning light. The room fell silent, except for the faint city sounds outside the life they had both fought to live on their own terms. Alexander raised his cup slightly, a quiet toast, to the word that started it all. Clara laughed through her tears. "Honey? Honey," he repeated, smiling. "The best mistake I ever heard." They stood together by the window, the city moving beyond them, endless and bright. Her voice closed the story like a whisper carried on the wind. "Once, I thought my life was defined by the things I got wrong. But now I know the right people will always see past your mistakes. And sometimes, love does not find you when you are perfect. It finds you when you are real." The camera would fade on their reflections in the glass, 2 people who met by accident and ended with purpose. Because in the end, love is not about titles, status, or power. It is about choosing each other every day with empathy first, and humanity always.